a look at the Daas Tevunos. We're on page 85 now. Those using in our Friedlander's version, those who are using the paragraph version, we're in paragraph 96. What we're talking about was the three levels, the three stages, the three general stages of interaction of neshama and guf. We analogize those three stages to the three stages of the history of the world, 0 through the year 6000. Post 6000 has its own stages. Post 6000, Ramchal taught us about very generally, and he said that the specifics we don't know as yet. But 0 to 6000, at this level, we understand a lot of details because we're living through it. We have a history about it. 5,781 years of history about how to understand this. So this is where he's going to focus. The interaction of guf neshama during this 6,000 year period. How does that translate into understanding how God runs the world during these 6,000 years? And we all know what it's going to come down to. We don't know how it works. Excuse me. We know that the basic two components, the basic two sources for running the world are hastoras panim and ha'oras panim. And even in the hastoras panim, we talked about the ha'oras panim is percolating inside it to bring the world lidei tikkun. But those are the two basic sources of all midos by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, hastoras panim and ha'oras panim. Guf comes from hastoras panim, neshama comes from ha'oras panim, as we've explained many times. So therefore, if I understand the ups and downs in the life of a human being, sometimes the human being is zeichet to a tremendous amount of ha'oras panim because he brought it into his life. Lo aleinu, a person gets hastoras panim because he brought it into his life. You sleep in the bed you made. If a person overindulges in guf, he's sending a signal to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's telling the Rebbeinu Shalom, to me, guf is more important than neshama. If guf is more important than neshama, guf's source material is hastoras panim. So if you like guf and you want to empower guf, we will send you as much guf as you want. Sending guf means sending lo aleinu hastoras panim, because that's what guf is. A person works with his neshama to sort of put the guf under control. Not that you can't have a guf, that you're going to have a Jewish guf. You're going to use the body for Torah and mitzvahs. You're going to use the body to be a constructive human being, to make yourself better, to make other people better, to do chesed, etc. Then you lift up the guf. And the more you lift up the guf, the more the guf transforms out of hastoras panim into ha'oras panim. So a person that is working with his neshama to lift up the guf, the signal, the message he's sending to Rebbeinu Shalom is, I want to empower neshama, I want to empower neshama. When that's the message, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you want to empower neshama, I'll send you more neshama. But what does sending more neshama mean? Neshama is ha'oras panim. I'll send you more ha'oras panim. That's basically the analogy. Now, when we go to the world, when the world as a community decides that it's going to empower guf, the Rebbeinu Shalom during that phase of history says, mankind would like guf, will send you a tremendous amount of guf, which is called hastoras panim. When mankind together, communities, Yiddishkeit, Yidden, the world gets together and says, we want to empower the neshama, we want to empower our values, our ethics, our morals, The Ribono Shel Olam says, okay, I'm going to send you more neshama. More neshama means ha'oras panim. So when, for example, in the days of Noach and the Mabul, people, the whole world basically became distorted, perverted, unethical, immoral. So they sent this major signal up to the Ribono Shel Olam. We want guf. We love guf. We love guf. We love guf. The Ribono Shel Olam said, you love guf? Say that. I'll send you as much guf as you want. What is I'll send you as much guf as you want? As much hastaras panim as you like, because you like the guf so much. That's hastaras panim. I'm going to send you tons of hastaras panim. Tons of hastaras panim results in the destruction of the world with Noach and his family on the table. So as we see world events going back and forth, up and down, we see mankind, lo aleinu, at war. We see mankind in peace. We see prosperity. We see the 40 years of Shlomo's Beis, those first 40 years of Shlomo's Beis HaMikdash, when nations of the world flocked here. These are all fluctuations of hastoras panim and ha'oras panim, not because they just happen. It's because it becomes a reflection of what we're doing as Yidden and what mankind is doing on earth. It's coming down because of what we do. If you listen to the mitzvahs, you will get rain in its time. So while God, no doubt, we're going to learn that now, was no doubt that God runs the whole world. In a certain way, we run the world. Because what we do here, I'll give you rain. I, God says, will give you rain if you're showing a Torah mitzvah. So the rain depends upon what I do. The weather depends upon what I do. And that's the way the world runs. If I send a message up, send down some ha'oras panim, that's what comes. Lo aleinu, I send up a message, guf, 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 hastaras panim is going to come down. And that's a way we're going to learn to understand world history and present day events. The first thing we need to understand is that what is Ra? Evil, bad things. Obviously, evil, bad things we associate with hastaras panim. God, so to speak, goes hidden, whatever that means. He's not giving full attention to what's going on, whatever that means. Hastaras panim, he hides his face. And when he hides his face, all kinds of things can happen because he's not watching it, so to speak. He's not giving it full attention, and all kinds of things can happen that would not happen if he was watching it closely. Whatever these things mean in Kabbalah, in higher levels, basic, ha'oras panim, God's light is shining on everything, and he's watching it very carefully. Some people will call that hashgacha pratis. And there are some times where the Ribono Shel Olam says, I'm going to cover it up. And when I cover it up, mankind, particular people, can fall into what we call mikre hazman. There's really no mikre hazman. We call it coincidence. There's no coincidence. So hastaras panim is really still ha'oras panim. It's percolating in there. But we understand through history and what we're living through today that there are times where the world's in a prosperous state, times where the world, according to our eyes, is in a complete state of chaos, a complete state of war, anarchy, and the world fluctuates between these kind of things. That is because we asked for it. Now, what is this evil that's associated with hastaras panim? Where did it come from? Did God say, let there be evil? I want evil in the world? Chas v'sholom. God is kuloi toiv. He's perfectly good. He did not create evil and invite it into this world. So where did it come from? There's no such thing there's nothing in the world that didn't come from the Ribono Shel Olam, lich'or. Ideas, as we always mention, come from the Ribono Shel Olam. Somebody thought up E equals mc squared. Einstein came up with this equation, E equals mc squared, not get that it's 100% accurate. He didn't make that true. He used E for energy, etc. He picked different letters, but what underlies that equation, whether it works and it's true mathematically, Einstein didn't get up one day and say, this is how the math of physics shall work. I so decree that E shall equal mc squared. He couldn't do that. He doesn't control the Bria. The Ribono Shel Olam put something into the world where a certain amount of this will equal a certain amount of this squared. Einstein found this, made the equation for it, and therefore he created an equation that already pre-existed in terms of concept because HaKadosh Baruch Hu put it into the Bria. There's no such thing that a person comes up and says, I just thought of something that God never thought of. No such thing. If that's the case, where does Ra come from? Is it a direct creation from God? God said, let there be evil in the world. We don't have in the Parshas Bereshis, in the Brias Olam, we have Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa v'nei toiv ma'od. We have Vayar Elokim ki toiv. We have a lot of ki toivs and toiv ma'ods in the Bria. The idea of Ra, we don't have in the Bria. We don't have a pasuk that says Vayar Elokim ezeh Ra. Later, after the chet of the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, we have a Bria called Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. But after that, we have psukim that say Ki Eitz Alei Ha'adam Ra Min Urav. There's now a discussion about Ra. In the Bria, we have an Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. But where did this Ra come from? So the Ramchal says through the Seichel, Ba'ulam, page 85, Ulam Mashi Yitztarach Levar Tchila, the first thing that I need to explain, Hu Inyan Metzias Hara Hazeh, the very existence of evil. Shuhu HaGoyim L'chol HaMasa HaAvod Azos, it is the existence of evil that brings about the great burden of work of a man's lifetime. Man's lifetime work is to put evil, to extinguish evil from the world. Daas kol gvuloisa, to know all the boundaries of evil. Can evil ever become so powerful to destroy the world, mamish, to destroy the world? We used to talk about the idea when we were kids that the United States has 25 nuclear weapons or 100 nuclear weapons, and the Russians have 80 nuclear weapons. And each of these nuclear weapons, when you put the nuclear weapons together, there are enough nuclear weapons in the world to destroy the whole world 100 times. Was it a real possibility? Now, there's a real possibility that a tremendous amount of human carnage can occur. But was there ever a possibility that the whole world would be gone, vaporized? No planet Earth, gone, vaporized. Was that a possibility that God put into the world, that man can completely vaporize planet Earth and it ceases to exist? So that's what the Ramchal's asking. Ladas kol gvuloisa, and he's going to talk about that later. Is there a border to evil? Is there a point where the Ribono Shel Olam says, no, you can't go any further? That's the border of evil. Ma inyano v'toldosa, what are the ramifications of having Ra in the world? Bameh kocho gadol, how is it so powerful? Uvameh, where does it draw its power from? Uvameh mesasasim oso, how do you chop it up? Remember, we had the mashal in the Ramchal the last time we learned it on page Pei Daled. Mashal, it says, to a large boulder that's put into the middle of a road. Nobody can use the road and people are getting hurt. And the king says, everybody bring your little hammer, chip away at this boulder. And as you chip away piece by piece, eventually it'll get so small, I'll come around with my men and we'll get rid of whatever's left. And so too the Rabbanu Shalom is saying, everybody take your little hammer, chip away at the evil or the midos rows that are in you, chip away at these things, because all the Ra in the world, besides being each person's Ra, there's a cumulative Ra. We're all in the ship together, as we explained. So every time a person at that boulder on the highway chops away a little of the boulder, he's not only doing himself a favor by chipping away at the boulder, so now the boulder's smaller, he's making it better for everyone so that the boulder's smaller. So every time, we read this in our Friedlander footnote 191, the bottom page, $, every time a person does his own tikkun and chips away at his Ra, he makes himself better, he makes the whole world better, because that little Ra that was in you is now no longer in you, and it's not in the world anymore. The world has been elevated. So the Ramchal says, again, back to Pei Hey, we need to know where the Ra draws its strength. How do we chip away at it so that ultimately we can vanquish it from the world? Kamai Morim Zal, like Chazal taught us with the marshal of the boulder. Uvamay Yavam in Olam. Ultimately, how do we rid the world of all evil? Fatiri, you will see. Kizeu Metzius Mechudish Lagamri, Sharotza Vechidish Osa Ha'adam Baruch Hu Lanasis Boy B'nei Ha'adam, Lases Lahem Mokim La'avoida. This thing of Ra is a completely new thing. It had nothing that was related to it, comparable to it, connected to it before the world was created. Before the world was created, we learned yesterday, we're learning the Ramban in Parshas Bereshis about Vayomer, about the Oretz Tov, Vavo, the stages of creation. The Ramban told us that we believe Yesoid and Yiddishkeit, God created the world Yesh Me'ayim. We talked about the Hiyuli yesterday. The Rosh Hashanah created the world Yesh Me'ayim. Yesh Me'ayim means there was nothing here before except the Rebbeinu Shalom. When the Rebbeinu Shalom was here, the Rebbeinu Shalom was Kulei Toiv. He is Toiv. That's about what we can say about this Toiv. He is Toiv. By his essence, not going to say that. We don't, not allowed to talk about his essence. He is Toiv. There was nothing pre-creation that had a semblance of Ra to it. It wasn't a concept. It wasn't in potential. It was nothing. There was nothing that would connect the Ra post-Bria to the Ra pre-Bria. There was nothing going on that you can link the Ra that was brought into the world after the Bria and say, oh, that's where it came from before the Bria. In order to have any form of Ra in the world, it's a Dova Mechudish Lagamri, the Ramchal says. It's a completely brand new thing that had to be brought in the world. It had nothing comparable to it, nothing you can link it to before God does something. And Ra comes into the world because God is Kulei Toiv. And before creation, there's nothing in the world but God. And God is Kulei Toiv. The idea that post-creation is going to be Ra, Dova Mechudish Lagamri. There's no hint of such a thing existing, actually or in concept or in potential, before the Bria. Nothing that can be associated with Ra. Nothing before Bria. Before the Rebbeinu Shalom brought this chiddush of something called Ra. Did he create it? That'll be a discussion in the Ramchal. Won't happen today. Ki ha'adayin baruch hu tachlis hatoiv hashleimus. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the tachlis of good and perfection. Hine kol mashu toiv af al pi shehu mechudash nikra shemesyaches elav yisbarach. The other hand, when we talk about good, we are now talking about something that can be associated pre-Bria. Post-Bria, there is Toiv in the world. And there's all kinds of Toiv in the world. Pre-Bria, There was no such thing as Tov, where God can bestow Tov to others. There are no others. So the idea that Tov would be bestowed on others, that's a new idea, because there are no others pre-Bria. The others come into being post-Bria. So the Tov that's going to be bestowed upon creation post-Bria is a new idea bestowed on others who didn't exist pre-Bria. But bottom line concept, goodness was there pre-Bria, because God was there pre-Bria, and God is pure, perfect goodness. So while the idea of taking goodness and giving it to a Bria is a new idea post-Bria, goodness in a vacuum already existed pre-Bria. That's completely different than Ra. Ra came into existence post-Bria. It has nothing to associate with pre-Bria, because pre-Bria is only God, and pre-Bria is only God's perfection and goodness. So the whole idea of Ra is a completely new concept that comes into the world post-Bria, whereas Tov, goodness, is a concept that was here in the existence of God, pre-Bria. Post-Bria, that goodness was now mechudash. A new thing happened, that goodness can be bestowed on creation. So therefore, Tov, post-Bria, is connected to the Ribono Shel Olam pre-Bria. Ra, post-Bria, is not connected in any way to anything about God pre-Bria. However, evil, adarabah, just the opposite. Evil is the exact opposite of God. There can't be anything more opposite than God himself than evil. God is the perfect good. As I explained to you, pre-Bria, there's not a semblance, there's not a connection, there's not an association between this idea of evil post-Bria and anything pre-Bria. No connection whatsoever. This whole thing is a brand new thing that occurs post-Bria. We are not ashamed of this concept. In the ivory towers of the philosophers, and this goes back, of course, to the Greeks, the Greek philosophers, if God is so perfectly good, how does bad occur in the world through a God who's so perfectly good? Where does evil come from? So maybe God's not perfectly good, chas v'sholom. Or you start getting into the Greek mythology. There must be multiple gods, chas v'sholom. Is the God of good, the God of evil, the God of beauty, the God of ugliness, the God of power, the God of weakness. And according to this mythology, there's a constant war in heaven. The good God is wrestling the bad God. When good things happen in the world, it's because the good God has the bad God on the ground. And then when the bad God gets up and he's able to overpower the good God, bad things happen in the world. So because of this question that they couldn't fully digest, how is it that a perfectly good God would allow bad to happen in the world? Or how can bad emanate from a perfectly good God? Must be to remain in my conviction that there's a perfectly good God, I have to take all the bad and put it into another God. Chas v'sholom. You have to understand what Ra is and where it came from. And adarabah, the Ramchal says, because God is all-powerful, almighty, God can create things that are opposite him. If we would say that God can only create good, he's not able to create. I'm not even going to use the word create. We're going to replace that. If we would say that God can bring that God cannot bring about evil in the world because it's opposite him, then I've just said that God's not almighty and all powerful. God is limited to who, quote unquote, his own existence. If his own existence is pure good, that's what he's limited to. He can only do pure good. It's a limited God. And if there's evil, I need another God to create for that. Chas v'sholom. So we are not ashamed of this idea. We have to understand the idea. But the Ramchal says, because God is almighty and all powerful, yes, he can create something that's opposite him. He can actually he can bring about evil in the world. He can bring into the world something that's completely opposite him because he's almighty and all powerful. It reminds me of the question we learned Daas Tevunos. It comes up at different points. Again, going back to the ivory tower of philosophers, the question people played around with, can God create a rock that's so heavy that he can't pick it up? Whatever you're going to answer the question, you're going to fall down a pit. God can create, God's almighty powerful. Of course he can create anything. And God can create a rock that he can't pick up. Oh, that means after he creates the rock, he can't pick it up. So there's something he can create, and after he creates it, it's too heavy for him to pick up. We're down the pit. Or you say God is almighty, all powerful. Of course, he can't create a rock that he can pick up. If he creates it, he can pick it up. So now we're down another pit. God can't create something. He can't create a rock that he can't pick up. So either he can't create, so he's not almighty, chas v'sholom, or he can create, but then he can't pick it up. So again, he's not almighty. So I'm a kareach mikan v'kareach mikan, bald here, bald there, as the Gemara says. And wherever you're going to try to stick me into, you're going to throw me down a pit. We don't need to get into these ivory tower questions. People like to spend years on this, and they write doctorate papers. We don't need to go through all that. We have no problem understanding that God can create something that's opposite his essence. That's it. I'm going to talk about this in a second when we get to Parashah. And this is what the pasuk says. We say it in davening. Yotze or uvore choshech, osa shalom uvore es hakol. Now, Chazal in the Gemara in Brachas Daf Yud Aleph from the base, the Gemara changed the bracha. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Yotzer Or Uvore Choshech Osa Shalom Uvore Es Hakol. God created everything. The pasuk where this bracha comes from is a pasuk in Yeshaya Mem Hey. That pasuk says Yotzer Or Uvore Choshech Osa Shalom Uvore Ra. God created evil. Chazal didn't want us to say God created evil, so instead of saying Borei Ra, we say Borei Es Hakol. You create everything. Whatever we say in the bracha, the point is that the pasuk says Borei Ra. Ani Hashem Oseh Kol Eila. It sounds like God actually created evil. Initially, we said God created Tov. Vayalakim Esa'arki Tov, 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 Tov. Where's the rock coming from? Did God actually say, this is evil and I'm going to put it into the world? Doesn't seem that way. And the Ramchal is going to teach us how it happened. But he's going to deal with this pasuk on the next page. We're not going to get to it today. He's going to deal with this pasuk, just opening up our eyes that there is a pasuk that says, Borei Ra, God created evil. And what does it mean he created evil? That he brought it somehow into the world. The point that the Ramchal is making here is, don't go off and create yourself a Greek mythological god of evil. You don't need to create another god, chas v'sholom. The God who is perfectly good and almighty and controls and runs and created the world, he is so almighty, he can create something that's opposite his very essence of good, and therefore he's able to create Ra. And the pasuk says, Yotzer or v'orei choshech osu shalom borei Ra, Ani Hashem Oseh Kol Eila. Yeshaya says the name of God, I am the one who did all these things. However, who Yisbarach Shem Tzio Lohim Tzio Eloshem Lishizvado. You need to understand that God brought evil into the world, not as a permanent fixture. God brought evil into the world with the full knowledge and intent to vanquish evil at some point, depending upon how much work we do. But it's something that was created for its destruction. It wasn't created to be a permanent fixture here. And as the mashal that Chazal said earlier about the rock, that boulder is the Yetzer Hara, and the Rebbeinu Shalom wants everybody to chip away at it until finally he vanquishes it from the world. And God brought it into the world with boundaries, how far evil can go, with its own rules of how it can work in the world, based upon the rules that God wanted for this thing called evil. Because at the end of the day, evil has no place in the world. This is God's beautiful world. God's beautiful world. In the beautiful world, God wants to be able to reward people in a beautiful way. And as we saw at the beginning of the Sefer, the most beautiful way to reward people is because they earned it, not free lollipops. To earn it, you have to make choices. To make choices, we're going to have to put into the world something called Ra. And now you can either embrace it, reject it, get schar, or not get schar. So the whole purpose of the Ra in the world is lilkot min hara atmo pri tov latzadikim. The whole purpose of the world is that the tzadikim should be able to eat fruit. Loseis lahem schar tov ba'olam. In order to give wonderful schar to people in the world for overcoming the guf, overcoming, not destroying the guf, using the guf for proper things, and lifting up the guf, and vanquishing the ra from the guf. And that's the transformation that we talk about, the first 6,000 years, then post 6,000 years, until you get to the last stage where you can't even call guf guf, because it's no longer even dense darkness interfering with the light of the neshama. Paragraph 97, Amar HaNeshama, the neshama said, there's no question that what you just explained to me about Ra, where did it come from? What are its limitations? This is something you're going to have to explain to me al tchunasa, with a specific or a detailed explanation. Because I see that this idea of Ra, where did it come from? What's its borders? How does it operate? How do you vanquish it? This has a lot of important ideas in it. Tzadik ches amar seichel, the seichel says to neshama, before we're going to answer all these questions, I have to present you with one very general, important principle about Ra. Tzadik tes amar haneshama, the neshama said, Emor, please seichel, enlighten me with your introduction. We'll pick up next week. Next week we're on page Pei Vav, paragraph Kuf, where the Seichel will begin an in-depth discussion of these questions about Ra. We should all be Zeicha to Ki Toiv La'od.